The struggle for freedom and independence is one that is old as mankind itself. It was also the main reason that hundreds of colonists from the British Cape Colony in South Africa decided to leave on an ambitious journey northwards into the hinterland to establish their own independent state in organized trek parties in 1836 and 1837, free from the stifling oppression and regulations of British rule. Their epic journey would come to be known as the Great Trek. These Voortrekkers, or Boers as they were called, would in future play a leading role in the history of South Africa, as depicted in frieze at the Voortrekker Monument in Pretoria. The leader of one of the trek parties was Piet Retief, already 56 years old when he was elected as Chief Commandant and Governor of the Trekkers. Because of the positive reports that had been received from the inland Natal area, Retief's trek party decided to cross the Drakensberg mountain range to settle there. When Retief and a few of his men made an advance expedition over the Drakensberg and saw the beautiful landscape of Natal, they gazed in awe. The visions and ideals that Retief had of an independent trekker or pioneer republic in Natal are clearly depicted in his statue by Kurt Steinberg in front of the Church of the Vow in Pietermaritzburg. Retief first called on Port Natal, now Durban. About 60 settlers welcomed him very cordially. Two major stumbling blocks had already been overcome. The Drakensberg had been crossed, and the group of British settlers in Natal welcomed his arrival. But there was a third stumbling block: Dingaan, king of the Zulus. He'd murdered his half-brother Shaka in 1829 and moved to a new capital, Umgungundlovu, place of the elephants. It's about 20 kilometers southwest of the current Ulundi in KwaZulu-Natal province. This capital was later sketched and painted by several people using eyewitness accounts and other sources of the period. Dingaan inherited a well-organized Zulu state and a daunting army from Shaka, and had the support of all Shaka's commanders. The Battle of Blood River would be heavily influenced by the war tactics of the Zulu, refined by Shaka and taken over by Dingaan. Think of the chest, head, and horns of an ox. These were the 4 tactical units of the Zulu army. Every unit had about 4,000 warriors, a total of 16,000, a similar number to the force that attacked at Blood River. The 2 horns consisted of the younger and bolder warriors, the feathered feet with the white and brown oxhide shields, armed with up to 4 throwing spears each. They attacked the enemy first, surrounded them, and caused consternation and alarm with their throwing spears that they could hurl as far as 50 meters. In fact, they could hurl up to 32,000 spears at the enemy. The head consisted of the older and more experienced warriors, the ringed heads. They would follow up an attack by the horns and make contact with the enemy with their stabbing spears. They formed up behind the head to support them, and also to prevent the warriors of the head from turning back and fleeing. The 4th unit was the chest, or reserve, and also consisted of experienced warriors. This technique was very effective against rival tribes, but it was not known if it would endure against Voortrekkers on horseback with their muzzle-loading rifles, their flexible battle tactics, and their wagon forts, the so-called lagers. While still in Port Natal, Retief sent a message to Dingaan saying he would be paying him a visit to negotiate for land for the Voortrekkers. Retief had no idea that he would be negotiating with a sly, suspicious man, a man who didn't hesitate to murder his own family. Piet Retief looked upon Ngungungulu for the first time on the 5th of November 1837. Today, a few built-up huts can be seen in the background. Retief came from the south and must have approached the capital from slightly to the left of the furthest point in the picture. Dingaan received Retief very cordially, or so it appeared. The negotiations also went without a hitch. Dingaan agreed to grant the area south of the Tukela River to the Mzimvubu River from the Drakensberg to the sea, and including Port Natal, to the Voortrekkers. This area was sparsely populated because Shaka had killed off or chased away most of the tribes who lived there. However, Dingaan's selling price was somewhat strange. Retief had to retrieve oxen from a captain, Sikonyela. The oxen were apparently stolen from Dingaan.
As ons moet ooreenkom oor grond, moet ons eers ooreenkom oor beeste. Jy moet die beeste wat gesteel is terugbring, saam met die diewe. Ek sal van my beeswagters saamstuur. Hulle sal die beeste ken. As jy dit doen, sal ek vir jou grond gee.
Retief was eager to agree to this because his ideal of a free Voortrekker republic would be a step closer to becoming a reality. First, he had to return to his people whose wagons at this stage were on the plateau named Kirkenberg, on the Natal side of the Drakensberg. News of Retief's successful negotiations with Dingaan had already reached the trekkers earlier, and they started to move towards him. It was Retief's birthday on the 12th of November, and his daughter Deborah painted his name in green paint on a flat stone in the area, where it can still be seen today. The trek down the mountains started on the 14th of November 1837. News of his successful negotiations with Dingaan had also reached other trek parties, who started moving towards Natal. Among them were the trek parties of Gerrit Maritz, A.H. Potgieter, and Piet Uys. Retief returned to his laager and asked for volunteers to accompany him to Dingaan. The oxen had to be formally handed over. Piet Retief and 69 of his men, among them his son, as well as 30 servants and wagon drivers, left the trekkers on the 25th of January 1838. They would never return. They approached Dingaan's capital from the west on the 3rd of February 1838. Dingaan received them the next day, Sunday the 4th. The transport document was explained to Dingaan by Thomas Halstead, an Englishman from Port Natal who could speak Zulu and who acted as an interpreter for Retief. After many questions and explanations, Dingaan signed the treaty. Three trekkers and 3 chief council members of Dingaan signed as witnesses. Then the festivities began. One can imagine how Retief and his men had to endure these festivities in silence, as a Sunday was a hallowed day to the voortrekkers. But Retief did not want to antagonize Dingaan with the treaty safely in his satchel, so they had to appear to take an interest. Many historians blame Retief for ignoring the warnings of some of his own people, the British settlers in Port Natal and the missionary Owen, by choosing to believe in Dingaan's sincerity. Retief was also aware of the fact that the land granted to him by Dingaan had already been promised to the British settlers in Port Natal. But his ideal of a safe, independent Voortrekker Republic was as good as done, and he was in a hurry to return to his people. Retief wanted to depart on Monday the 5th of February, but Dingaan announced that he wanted to bid them farewell on Tuesday the 6th. The Zulus started dancing again, and the trekkers were uneasy. As was the custom, they left their horses and rifles outside the capital. On Dingaan's order, kill the wizards, Retief and his men were overpowered and their hands tied with thongs. They were taken to a nearby hill, KwaMatiwane, and killed with fighting sticks. Their 30 servants were also killed. What prompted Dingaan to carry out such a treacherous deed? Many reasons are given. It's a fact that Dingaan feared the trekkers, who were entering his land in large numbers. Their victory over Mzilikazi's Matabeles and the apparent ease with which they defeated Sikonyela strengthened his distrust in the trekkers. He would destroy the whites in his land once and for all. The murder of Retief and mobilization of Dingaan's forces the next day was witnessed by the missionary Owen. His house was situated on a hill outside the capital. Although Dingaan assured him of his safety, he packed his belongings and left for Port Natal to leave the country, never to return. The unsuspecting trekkers were in the areas now known as Escourt, Colenso and Wienen when they were attacked on the night of Saturday, the 17th of February, 1838. Luckily, some of the lagers received news of the attacks and could temporarily halt the Zulu forces, but the damage had already been done. All their livestock was taken, and 282 voortrekkers and 250 servants were dead. A section of the Zulu force also attacked Port Natal and destroyed everything. The British settlers found shelter on a ship in the harbour, escaping certain death. After the death of Retief, Gerrit Maritz, Piet Uys and A.H. Potgieter were elected as the leaders of the voortrekkers in Natal. A commando under the leadership of Uys and Potgieter was drawn into an ambush at Italeni on the 6th of April 1838. Piet Uys and his son died, and Potgieter and his men had to flee for their lives. This expedition would henceforth be known as the Vlugkommando in Afrikaans, meaning the commando that flees. The voortrekkers accused Potgieter of cowardice. He was so aggrieved about this that he took his people back over the Drakensberg and would later play an important role in the Transvaal and the South African Republic. The Zulus launched an attack on Gat's Lager, also known as Veglaar, meaning a lager ideal for fighting, next to the Bushmans River in a deep valley on the 13th of August 1838. The valley afforded the trekkers natural defences, and this time they were prepared. A wagon laager, of which all the entrances were blocked with thorn branches, was the only way to repel an attack. The 75 prepared men were only able to drive off the Zulus on the third day. Dingaan was not impressed with the performance of his warriors at Gotslaager, and he demoted them to the left horn unit of young recruits. This was a big embarrassment to them, and they had to do something in order to gain back Dingaan's favor. Gerrit Maritz died on the 23rd of September 1838. With Potgieter leaving Natal and Uys dead, the trekkers were now without a leader. But a Voortrekker deputation had already arrived in Graaff-Reinet in the Eastern Cape in August of 1838 to ask a well-known and respected man to join the Voortrekkers in Natal. That man was Andries Pretorius. He was elected as chief commandant of the Voortrekkers and immediately began preparing a military commando for a possible attack by the Zulus. 5 days later, the commando, consisting of 57 wagons and 400 men, departed in a northeastern direction towards Umgungundlovu. They would now take the offensive to stop Dingaan's attacks. Along the way, some more able men joined the commando with their wagons. The idea of a covenant with God had its origin with Andries Pretorius. If God gave them victory over the enemy, they would build a church in his honor, and they and their descendants would commemorate the day of victory as a Sabbath. They made a laager on Sunday the 9th of December 1838 at Wasbank. During the morning devotional service, Sarel Cilliers included the covenant as part of his prayer. The covenant was repeated every day until the 15th of December. Aside from the covenant, Pretorius laid down strict instructions to the men as to their code of conduct and common goals concerning the battle. The commando approached an area 30 kilometers southwest of Vryheid, from a hill in the west, later to be known as Vegkop or Fighting Hill. They traveled down a slope to the Unwavering River, moving in columns of 4. Some of the wagons had already crossed the river when the scouts returned and reported seeing the main Zulu force at Umqutu, about 20 kilometers away. The Zulus would therefore reach the laager that evening. Pretorius immediately ordered the wagons to come back across the river. He also recalled all the scouts with a cannon shot. They moved slightly to the south and formed a laager where bronze wagons commemorating the event now stand. The trekkers were trained so well that the laager was formed within an hour. Pretorius departed with 300 men to confront the Zulus, but decided to cancel the operation as it was already afternoon and the next day would be Sunday. Tactically speaking, this was the correct decision. A confrontation with the Zulus in the open veld would, as experience had taught them, be risky. But let's take a closer look at the laager and the surrounding area. The laager consisted of 64 wagons, giving it a circumference of 400 meters, about the size of an athletics track around a football field, with a diameter of 65 meters. With 10 oxen per wagon, there were 640 oxen in the laager, fastened to posts in the ground with thongs. The oxen were exceptionally tame and used to the sound of gunfire and cannons. It's estimated that there were also about 750 horses. The manpower consisted of 464 trekkers, including 3 British settlers, accompanied by 100 Zulus, 100 wagon drivers, and about 120 coloured men. A total of about 800 men. only the trekkers and the 3 British settlers would actively take part in the battle. The others would tend the livestock and help load the cannons and rifles. The gaps between the wagons were about 2 meters in size. They were closed with battle palisades constructed before their departure on Pretorius' request. He knew that there would not always be thorn branches available to fill the gaps. Battle palisades were also placed between the front and back wheels and then chained to the wagons. These palisades prevented the enemy from penetrating the laager. The artillery consisted of 3 cannons, one at the main entrance to the north, one at the northwestern side, and another to the east. The cannons were used sparingly because they consumed a lot of gunpowder that could be more effectively used in the muzzle-loading rifles loaded with slugs. The main entrance at the northern side was closed by pulling together 2 wagons with their wheel shafts pointing to the inside of the laager, so that the entrance could be easily opened and closed by moving the wagons forwards or backwards. The cannon known as grikkie was mounted on an undercarriage of heavy iron wheels instead of the more usual wagon axle and positioned at the gate. When mounted on wagon wheels, the cannon had the disturbing habit of falling over backwards when fired. Grikkie is on display at the Voortrekker Monument in Pretoria. Today it's mounted on wagon wheels to make it easier to move. The cannon on the northwestern side was named Weeskind, meaning orphan, because so many children, so it's said, were made orphans when the cannon was fired. Grikkie and Weeskind. These cannon were loaded with shrapnel, pieces of pot iron, stones and nails, and could fire up to 300 or 400 meters, and were devastating at shorter distances. The cannon to the east belonged to Pretorius. It was a 3-pounder. In other words, it could only fire a round bullet of 3 pounds, about 1.5 kilograms. Depending on the charge of gunpowder, it could fire up to 1,500 meters. Every man normally had 3 or more muzzle-loading rifles, and with assistance to load them, the shots followed each other rapidly. The trekkers stood between the wagons to shoot, about 8 men in every opening. On horseback, it was possible to fire 4 shots per minute, if the rifle fired every time. On the outside of the laager, lanterns were hung on the ends of whip handles fastened to the wagons. Although the flames were not very bright, they were enough for lookouts to spot a moving figure near the wagons. The glow also made it possible for the voortrekkers to aim their rifles accurately. Was it coincidence that the commando arrived in an area where a deep ravine with its sides more than 4 meters high was situated at the southern end of the laager? Was it also a coincidence that they would have a river on their eastern side that originally ran deeper and wider, with a hippopotamus pool deeper than the length of a whip handle? These were natural barriers or traps. Could it, in the words of Cyril Cillier, be the Lord in his ultimate providence, who coincidentally led them to this spot? The laager was not very close to the river on the eastern side because it had rained and the area was marshy. Originally, the area was overgrown with reeds. Towards the south, the laager was also not too close to the ravine, but about 40 meters away, so that it would be out of the reach of the throwing spears if the Zulus decided to attack from that side. That evening, the trekkers had a devotional service under the leadership of Cyril Cillier. The covenant was repeated for the last time, and the Voortrekkers prayed together and sang Psalm 38. Pray, forsake me not forever. Be thou never far removed from me, O God. Hasten, Lord of my salvation, in compassion to uphold me with thy rod. The Zulus must have been near because they could hear the Voortrekkers singing, but it was interpreted as wailing. The Zulus in turn sang their own warrior song. We journey to war, over the hills yonder, over the hills where the sun sets, to a country we do not know. We journey for you, King and Father, Lion, Elephant, Liberator, King of Kings, King of the Zulu, Dingaan. We greet you. Then everything became quiet. It is unlikely that anyone fell asleep. 800 men awaited the arrival of the Zulus and the possibility of a night attack. The Zulu force, under Mkhlela, commander-in-chief, approached the laager just after midnight. In other words, on the 16th of December 1838, from a southeasterly direction. The two horns of the attacking force arrived first, with the left horn, consisting of the demoted and humiliated warriors, nearest to the Nhlome River. A heavy fog rolled over the laager, and the only thing the Zulus could see was the dim flickering of the lanterns on the whip handles. They thought it was the Voortrekker ancestors protecting the laager, and, contrary to their normal procedure, they did not attack during the night. This was a costly tactical error. Had the Zulu attacked the laager during the night, the Voortrekkers would easily have been overpowered. Their muzzle-loading rifles would not fire in the wet, foggy weather. The left horn, the section nearest to the river, decided to attack the laager on their own and thereby win back Dingaan's favor. They forded the river at a drift, about 600 meters south of the laager, and went slightly to the west to avoid the ravine, thereby ending up in an area just to the west of the laager. But then they lost their way in the heavy fog. It appeared as if the laager had totally disappeared. Strangely, or even mysteriously enough, the horses and oxen in the laager didn't make a sound. Any sound would have given away the position of the laager to the Zulus. In the laager, the trekkers could hear the shuffle of 4,000 pairs of feet outside in the dark. It sounded like thundering water coming down on them, or strong wind blowing. It was overwhelming, terrifying. They could even smell the Zulus' bodies smeared with fat. In desperation, the lost left horn then formed a semicircular position, 100 meters deep, 50 meters from the laager, and settled down. The scene was set for the most famous, most unique, and most epic battle in the history of South Africa. At sunrise the following morning, the fog lifted within minutes. It was a bright, sunny day, an ideal day for the rifles and cannons of the trekkers. The trekkers must have been horrified to see 4,000 Zulus within 50 meters of the laager. Perhaps equally horrified were the Zulus as the laager arose from the mist in front of them. When the Zulus received the order, they first started with their attack drill by hitting on their shields, jumping up and down, whistling and shouting their battle cry, Usutu. Before the Zulus could gather momentum and throw their spears, the trekkers fired their rifles and Weeskant, the cannon on the western side, and created havoc. Wave upon wave of Zulus attacked, but their utterly closed ranks and their dead friends were a great hindrance. The throwing spears fell short of the laager. They could not bear the terrible assault of the voortrekkers much longer, and some of them tried to hide in the ravine towards the southern end of the laager. The trekkers moved out of the laager at the southern end and fired down the bank into the churning mass of bodies in the ravine. This was too much for the Zulus. Those in the ravine began fleeing towards the south through the ford. The trekkers pursued them on horseback and killed hundreds more. More than 1,000 Zulus died. This then was the first phase of the battle that took place from 6:30 to 8 o'clock in the morning. The trekkers scarcely had time to rejoice over their apparent success and to prepare their weapons and ammunition when the rest of the Zulu force approached from the southeast and took up positions in front of Shogane Heights. 16 Zulu commanders gathered slightly further to the north. When the right horn saw their brothers of the left horn flee, they stormed the river. However, they could not cross it, and the trekkers fired on them from the opposite bank. While the battle was raging at the river, Pretorius ordered that his cannon on the eastern side of the laager be directed to the hill where the commanders were gathered. It was nearly 2,000 meters away. Rocks were placed under the cannon to give it elevation, a double load of gunpowder was used, and the shot was fired. 12 of the 16 commanders were killed. Was it just a lucky shot? It's alleged that the death of the commanders totally unsettled and demoralized the Zulu force. It was also the only shot fired by the cannon during the battle, and it fell over backwards. The right horn could not succeed in crossing the river directly across from the laager, so they swerved southwards towards the drift below the ravine. The head and chest, which were congregated on the slopes of the Shogane, followed them. They moved through the drift, around the ravine, and approached the laager from the west. Some time passed between the battle at the river and the last movement of the Zulus. This was the end of phase 2 of the battle. The number of Zulus killed from the right horn at the river is not known. The third phase would be the main attack. The force descending on the laager now consisted of about 12,000 men. The right horn attacked immediately and launched one attack after another at the laager with their throwing spears. However, just like the left horn, they were repelled with rifle and cannon fire from the voortrekkers. There was great confusion. When an attack failed, the older regiments, the head and chest, swore at their comrades and constantly tried to pass their ranks. The voortrekkers wanted to prevent the Zulus from resting or sitting down to wait for the dark. Their ammunition was getting low. At 11 o'clock, the Zulu attacks ceased. They started to withdraw, and Pretorius rode out with 150 men to divide them into 2 groups. The Zulus who fled towards the east tried to cross the river, but they were shot in the water by the voortrekkers. The blood of about 1,000 Zulus turned the water of the Nkome River red. Afterwards, it was known as Blood River. The pursuit continued through the river in a northerly direction towards Shogane and Ntabana. Miraculously, there were only 3 trekker casualties, the most serious of which was Andries Pretorius, who was wounded in the hand by a spear. The group swerving towards the left moved in a southerly direction around the ravine to the drift, and then in a northern direction. This area would later be known as Mtambo, the Plain of Bones. Other Zulus fled west towards Verkop. The trekkers pursued them for 3 hours. Towards the late afternoon, everyone returned to the laager. The Battle of Blood River was over. Pretorius Commando would henceforth be known as the Wen Commando, or Winning Commando. But the scene outside the lager was one of the most tragic sights in the history of Africa. The battlefield was strewn with corpses. More than 3,000 Zulus died. Why was it destined to happen? Perhaps only the words of the South African poet C.M. van den Heever convey the cold reality which was hidden by the slowly setting sun that 16th of December 1838. He saw the tragedy of a courageous young Zulu warrior reaped in one moment. Your body gleams like copper on the veldt. The bending grasses drop on you their morning dew. Here where you sleep your final sleep. Your snow-white plumes still quiver, as if in war, but the dark stain beside you is blood lost in the sand. Your hand, lifeless and grey beside the bright keen spear. Your king in Umgungundlovu will wait for you, his hands shading his eyes, lost far amidst the blue where you went out to war. And he will wait for the stamp of feet, the clatter of your advance, for the whirl of white betufted legs untamed in battle dance. The hills will call you, and a Zulu girl alone beside her fire will watch at night, gazing in silence till the morning light. A religious service of gratitude was held in the lager, the first covenant service. The next morning, 17th of December 1838, the lager was dismantled and the trekkers started moving in a southwesterly direction towards Umgungundlovu, Dingaan's headquarters. They approached Umgungundlovu on the 20th of December 1838, but Dingaan had torched his capital and fled north with his followers. He was defeated, but not the Zulu nation. Andries Pretorius and the Voortrekkers made a gruesome discovery on the 22nd of December on Kwa Matiwane, where this monument was erected in 1922. The remains of Piet Retief and his men. They recognized Retief's skeleton from bits of clothing, his water bottle and satchel. The satchel still contained the transport document that Dingaan signed, completely safe. Three days later, it was Christmas, but it would be a gloomy day for the Voortrekkers. They buried the remains of Retief and his men at the foot of a hill on that day. The grave was restored in 1920 and a headstone was erected. The following year, 1839, the Voortrekkers declared the Republic of Natalia in the area that Dingaan granted to them. The area north of the Tugela was still considered to be Zulu land. For the interim, the yearning for freedom and independence had been satisfied, and they could focus their attention on carrying out the covenant. The first part of the covenant, that we would erect a house in his honor, was already completed in 1840, when the Voortrekkers utilized the Church of the Covenant that was built in Pietermaritzburg, their capital, for the first time. The Church of the Covenant can still be seen today. The gables and the foyer were added at a later stage. During the years following the Battle of Blood River, the 16th of December had been commemorated amongst many communities as a Sabbath. It was known as Dingaan's Day from 1910, but because of objections against the name, it was changed to the Day of the Covenant in 1952. After the elections in 1994, the new South African government reviewed the public holidays to reflect the diversity of peoples of the country. It was decided that the 16th of December would in future be known as Reconciliation Day. In many Afrikaner communities, the 16th of December is still commemorated in the spirit of the original covenant, as it was affirmed from the 9th to the 15th of December 1838, and is reaffirmed at places such as the Blood River Heritage Site and the Voortrekker Monument in Pretoria. This program is based on information as it was recorded in archival and primary sources. Over the years, different interpretations of the Battle of Blood River have seen the light. Some historians even doubt the fact that the battle occurred, whilst others are of the opinion that the Voortrekkers' victory was a miracle. The last word on Blood River has not been spoken. No one will ever be able to undo the significance that the 16th of December has for many Afrikaner communities to this day. However, 28 years after the Battle of Blood River, a strange gathering took place at the same spot where the battle was fought. This event set an example of peace and reconciliation far into the future of South Africa. The day was the 16th of December 1866. A huge number of Voortrekkers and their children came from far and wide to commemorate the battle. Then, from the east, over the Plain of Skulls, came Cetshwayo, king of Zululand. With him was a great following of warriors. But this time, he had not come to do battle with the Voortrekkers, but to celebrate the peace and friendship between them. Cetshwayo addressed the Boers and emphasized the strong ties between the Zulu nation and the Boer nation. Ties so strong that it were as if the two groups were living under the same roof. Then the Zulus and the Boers stacked a heap of rocks to commemorate the Battle of Blood River and the peace between them. After 164 years, this simple monument remains, a quiet memory of an epic battle fought way back in history. Of all the documented historical events in the history of South Africa, the Battle of Blood River stands out as the greatest, but also the most tragic moment of all. The memories of this great battle will live on as a marker on the path of South Africa.